morning. Welcome back to Tea Time with Sarah. This morning I am having a nice cup of mint tea. Today I'd like to talk especially to my sisters in Christ. I know that some of you have wondered about friends of yours who have said that they've turned Torah Observant or Messianic or whole Bible believers. There are lots of different words that refer to people who are basically following the Old Testament and the New, and they don't see a difference basically between the two. I know there's a lot of confusion in there. And one of my good friends 10 years ago said that she and her husband were now becoming Messianic and tried to explain what all that meant. I was really confused. I had no box to put what she was talking about in. You see, I grew up in the Christian world. I went to two of the most well-known Christian colleges, so I thought that I knew all the different types of Christianity, or most of them, but I didn't understand what she was talking about. So, when she was done explaining the best that she could, and I was done questioning all that I could, I remember saying, "Okay, you're Messianic Jewish." And she said, "No, we're not Jewish. We're the Messianic part, but not the Jewish part." And because I had no box to put that in, I just said, "Okay, whatever you want to call it. To me, you guys are basically Messianic Jewish." And she kind of shrugged and said, "Okay." A few months ago, I finally heard someone explain what I think is the best explanation to say what we believe. This is kind of the best explanation I can do that would make the most sense to me 10 years ago if my friend had explained it this way. So believers, on the whole, agree with three parts of our walk. There's a justification, sanctification, and glorification. I'll just explain it that way. See, what the Torah Observant, Messianics, whole Bible believers, we agree with the rest of the Christian church for the most part, but the very basics we agree with. Justification is you are saved through Jesus Christ, which a lot of us call Yeshua because his Hebrew name actually is Yehoshua, Joshua, which means Yah is our salvation. So that's one of the reasons why we do it, because it actually has that meaning, that name. But basically, we agree with that Jesus Christ was born, died, resurrected, and is now living with the Father in heaven, and he's our high priest. So we agree with that. It is by grace alone, through faith alone. We agree on the same thing there. Then there's sanctification, and then there's glorification. Glorification, again, there's lots of nuances on all how you agree, but essentially it's the idea that one day we will be raised again to resurrected bodies and live with Yah forever. We agree with most of Christianity on those two parts. It's that part that we're living in right now, that sanctification, that's where the disagreement comes in. And so if you have a friend who's saying things like, "Oh, I'm super excited, I'm following the Torah," or, "Oh, I was reading it and I realized that we should really be following the feasts," or, "Why aren't we worshiping Yah on the Sabbath, on Saturday instead of Sunday?" All of these things that seem so big and so different, and in the Christian world, we are taught that that is all what they're discussing is salvation, justification. I did the same thing as others have done to us. We throw Galatians at them. We say, "Well, don't you know this?" or "Don't you know that?" But it's all talking about the justification. And the reason why they're saying, "No, we're not disagreeing with that," but it seems like they are, it's because it's the justification versus the sanctification. So the sanctification part is how we're supposed to live our lives now, right? That is the part where it is. It's what you do after you're saved. And so from my experience, a lot of the Christianity gets this part well, and they preach this, but they don't really explain much going from then on. And I know it's different in different places, but exactly how do you explain that? How does that work out? That sanctification, that's where we look straight at the New Testament Gospels and we say, we're going to follow Yeshua and how he acted. That is the heart that I have heard so many times throughout my whole life from believers like you who really, really want to follow God. You really want to follow Jesus. You want to do what he did and follow after him. And I have talked, though, with dear friends who are in all the different denominations, but they all say that that is what they want to do, is they want to follow him and walk as he walked. I have friends who are Calvinists who say the 5-point Calvinist, that gets you back as close as you can to the original disciples and apostles. I have friends who's Orthodox. They say the same thing. Nope, we come from the original disciples and apostles. A friend who is Catholic, she says, nope, we come from the original apostles and disciples. Pentecostal, we go back to the original apostles and disciples. All of my friends, and they all have Bible verses for it, and they all have reasons to believe what they believe and why, which is good. But when you talk about what they actually do, where they actually celebrate Shabbat, or they actually wore tzitzits, or they followed Yeshua in doing and celebrating the feasts, those things, when I've had discussions with them throughout my life, the answer is, oh, well, we don't do those things. Because, yeah, we know Jesus did them, but we don't really do that. So that's kind of been a question in the back of my mind in those discussions of, it would be neat to do that. That's what everyone's trying to do. And yet nobody says, yeah, we can go ahead and actually follow him. That's where the Torah Observant and the Sabbath keepers and the Messianics, what they all have realized is to just take it very literally, the Bible, in many ways. And I know when you get into Hebrew, there's actually circles and cycles. It's not simply reading it literal. And I'm aware of that. But I'm just talking about there is that literal level to a lot of the Bible where we've been taught it's poetic, ideological. A lot of the Greek worldview thinking has really overshadowed how we read the Bible, even though we don't realize it. So that's one of the biggest things, is that sanctification process. A lot of the Torah Observant believers believe that we should actually be following the Torah because the Old Testament through the New Testament is one book, and it should be. And I know it's, how can you do that? And there's all these verses and stuff. It doesn't make sense. But there's so much about that actually answers a lot of questions people have. Questions like, God said throughout the Torah, these commands you do forever. And he also said things like, these are my feasts that you're supposed to celebrate through all generations. I thought it was neat that the Jews did it, but I never thought that that was for Yah. Like, he's the one who said, these are his feast days. So anyone who is following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these are the appointed times, the times when he said that he wants to meet with us. Not on any day of the week, not on any holiday that we make up. He said these are the ones that he wants to meet with us. And that just blew my mind when it was pointed out that that's, and I looked into it and I read it. Is that really what it says? And it is. Go look it up and see. The joyful things that our Father has given to us, those are the things that we've been told for the last 1700 years that are not for us, that we're not supposed to help partake in. It's not what he said. And when you look at it, it is interesting that things like clean and unclean animals, if you look back to Noah, which was before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Noah brought onto the ark more clean animals than unclean animals. those things were there. Yah has always had his commands in place, even before the flood. So these are just some of the ways and some of the reasons why your friends might have turned Torah observant or Messianic, whole Bible believers, is that they have the same heart that you do to go back and actually worship how the original disciples and apostles did. So that's why they're doing that. And so, like I said, maybe mostly on the justification and then the glorification. It's the sanctification part that a lot of us have seen, and we believe that since the Council of Nicaea, a lot of things changed. And we see that being a really big issue and a big deal that changed the course of believers in the church at that point. I hope that helps some for those of you who are trying to figure out where and how and why they're different and their beliefs are different. Like I said, they get into a lot more deeper stuff, but that's really the basics of it. So in talking with them, just realize that it's a sanctification time that we're living in right now, where the disagreements come from. And there's actually a lot of verses that back that up. In short, if you look at what John says in 1 John about what sin actually is, sin is the transgression of the law, right? So it's big words, I know, but other versions translate it as sin is lawlessness. And so if sin is lawlessness, it means it's not doing and obeying the law. So the opposite of that would be obedience to the law, right? So that's where a lot of people want to follow the law. Yeshua also talks about it. I know that a lot of Paul's readings are really hard and confusing, but Peter actually addresses that in 1st, 2nd Peter. He says that Paul's writings are confusing. And when we remember that Paul was a Pharisee of Pharisees, he knew the Torah, he knew the Tanakh, the Old Testament, he knew that backwards and forwards. And so when he came to Christ, to Yeshua, like his understanding, I believe Yah just taught him all sorts of stuff. So he was trying to explain things to us, but as even Peter said, it's really deep and hard to understand. So just to really focus and just see, go back and see. I would really encourage you to go back and see the words written in red and just read what Yeshua says, remembering that everything that he said is based on a knowledge of the Torah. That would help you if you really have a heart to understand why friends or family have decided to go and become this Torah observant. I think that would really help you. I hope that you have a fantastic day. I hope this helps you. All right. Bye.